Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition, where my guests and I will discuss Buncombe County District Attorney Todd Williams' prosecution of two journalists. This program is very timely because in 3 days, it'll be the 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day, which the United States established to remind governments about the need to respect their commitment to freedom of the press. Before I bring in my guests, I want to make some introductory remarks because this issue is not just a professional interest of mine, it's a personal one. 5 years ago, I was arrested in a similar manner for live streaming a protest of the Poor People's Campaign in the state Senate in Sacramento, California. Like the defendants in this case, I was the first one targeted before they arrested any of the protesters. Even after I told them I was media, they said if I didn't leave the chamber, I would be arrested. I made a decision on the spot that defending the First Amendment was important enough for me to be arrested. So you can even hear my voice on my stream saying, fine, then I'm live streaming my arrest before the camera goes dead because my hands were behind my back in handcuffs. Last night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, President Biden said, quote, "A free press is a pillar, perhaps the pillar of a free society, not the enemy." He also said, quote, "Journalism is not a crime." He said this all by way of criticizing the Russian government for jailing a U.S. journalist on espionage charges. I thought it was highly hypocritical, seeing as Biden is continuing Trump's Justice Department's effort to extradite and try journalist and publisher Julian Assange for espionage, even though he was doing journalism by publishing documents showing the U.S. was guilty of war crimes. But back to our local situation, I noted that later in his speech, when addressing the audience of journalists, Biden said, quote, "You make it possible for ordinary citizens to question authority," unquote. I thought of that when considering these two journalists I'm interviewing tonight were doing. They were documenting the police raid of people who were protesting police sweeps of homeless encampments in Aston Park after dark. Biden also read the last part of a pertinent quote by Thomas Jefferson. I will read the whole quote. Quote, "The people are the only censors of their governors, and even their errors will tend to keep those to the true principles of their institution. To punish these errors too severely would be to suppress the only safeguard of the public liberty. The way to prevent these irregular interpositions of the people is to give them full information of their affairs through the channel of the public papers, and to contrive that those papers should penetrate the whole mass of the people. The basis of our governments being the opinion of the people. The very first object should be to keep that right." And this was the part that Biden quoted. "And were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." Now I would like to introduce my guests. And they are Melissa Bliss and Veronica Coit. Do you pronounce it Coit or Coit? I should have asked.
It's Coit.
Coit! I didn't get it right either way. Okay, Veronica Coit, their attorney, Ben Scales, and Director of Advocacy for the Freedom of the Press Foundation, Seth Stern. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I want to make a note that I did not extend an invitation to DA Todd Williams for the following reasons. One, if he didn't get back to the Citizen Times, he probably would not get back to me. Two, if he did, he would most likely deny that he was prosecuting the defendants for doing journalism, but merely for trespassing, which is pretty much what the judge said, but we'll get to that later. And three, he would have said that he cannot comment on pending litigation. In any case, my effort tonight is to give the defendants an opportunity to explain why they did what they did and to answer some objections that have been leveled at them by members of this community. So let's start with you, Matilda. Please tell the viewers about yourself, the publication you write for, the Asheville Blade, and why you and Veronica went to the park that night. Were you planning to cover the protest only, or were you tipped off that there was going to be a raid?
We had information to say that there was, something that was going to happen like the other nights where there were, going to be people in the park. Like the other nights, we covered that as a, event of public interest that other news outlets in town had covered. So we knew that people were going to be in the park. I showed up early on, about late afternoon, early evening. And it was just a really chill atmosphere. A lot of, I'd say probably 20, 30 people, maybe 40 at max. But, just people hanging out, eating food, playing music, just enjoying each other's company. And so I was there, part of being a pretty small publication. I needed to step away for some gig work. And so I did that. And then it was at that point that I was, this was like somewhere around 9:30, I was told that, if you can, to make it back to the park, because yes, there were cops that had showed up, and they are threatening to remove people, which would be a violation of their 7-day standard operating procedure as far as camp removal. So I went back and was actually able to be in the park watching the police come up the hill. Probably 8 to 10 officers coming up the hill of Aston to tell people to leave. Veronica, this is about when Veronica showed up, but I guess, and you asked me to explain some things about myself. So I am a reporter with the Asheville Blade. My first article was in early 2019, writing about the Tourism Development Authority. The article is called Tourism Machine. Feel free to search it on the ashevilleblade.com. I had done articles in 2019, 2020, have done some photography, mostly focusing on articles. For anybody who's not aware, like the Asheville Blade, we're pretty open about the fact that we're a leftist publication. As Ben introduced us in the trial, yes, we believe in defunding and abolishing the police. And, we report the news from that angle. We cover events. We don't make up stuff.
Okay, so what was the extent of the coverage? Were you like taking notes to write an article later on? Were you recording video? Were you live streaming, or some combination of all the above?
I was corresponding with my news collective about different events that were happening, was able to get some photos over. So that was about the extent. It was just, informing the Blade that, of different developments through the afternoon and evening.
Okay, Veronica, talk about what you were doing there and lead us up to the time when you guys were arrested.
So, I showed up just to deliver Matilda a plate of dinner. I had been with my family all day because it was Christmas. And I had, I did know that cops had been there earlier, but I had no idea what was really happening at the moment that I arrived, until I looked down the hill and saw that there were very suddenly like 10 cop cars. And I looked at Matilda and realized that I couldn't leave her, and that clearly they were about to do something and it needed to be witnessed as much as possible. And I handed my keys and also my best friend and my son, and I asked if they would bring me a jacket from the car. And Matilda and I didn't, for the most part, we didn't stand super close to each other just to make sure we didn't miss anything. Stayed out of the way as much as possible. Like, definitely didn't try to interfere with any of the cops doing anything. Told them, I know we both told them who we were and who we were with. And then the next thing I know, I'm being put in handcuffs, and I was still shocked. I couldn't believe. I think if you watch the video, you can actually hear me say, "Are you serious right now?" I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Now, so, and you actually showed them your press pass, right, Matilda?
Yes, I was wearing my press pass around my neck, and I was, telling them I was press, telling them why I was there, telling them that I have First Amendment right to be there, and I believe even pointing at my pass. And they clearly knew that I had it because they referred to it in the body cam footage that was released. They knew I was press.
So were you actually video recording? Because I think the body cam footage shows that they said you're recording. Were you actually, like, with your phone recording what they were doing?
Personally, I was audio recording. And that was a really important part of why I needed to be where I was. But Veronica was videotaping.
Okay. Now, Veronica, are you a journalist? Were you just a journalist at this moment, or have you been doing journalism prior to this?
I started working with the Blade in 2020, following what was happening. That was major news all over the country at the time. It's really high risk COVID, so it was a risk to be outside, and I felt safe enough with my physical health that I could be out there to cover it. And it kind of happened on accident, and I've been with the Blade ever since, and it's been really wonderful to learn from Matilda and David and be a part of the collective.
Okay, now another criticism or comment is that you were not just doing journalism, that you were part of the protest itself. So first of all, is that true? And second, even if it is true, do you believe that you can do both at the same time? Either one of you can answer.
I can start. I think that it's pretty clear how I felt about what the police were doing that week. As an individual, I have social media accounts. I was not shy about expressing my views on those accounts. I think that there is a line between, the roles that we take on as journalists in coverage, and like being able to, for instance, like if there's police around, like, focusing on the coverage, to not get in the way of, officers that would, that would be something that would not be, within the rights of journalists. So I think that, like, any journalists that you see out there, they're either going to express their personal views on their personal accounts, or they're going to even, play up whatever industry is coming to town, whether it, for instance, like there was a lot of, fluff pieces written about Pratt & Whitney, the Raytheon subsidiary, like there's all kinds of journalism that has a bias coming in to their coverage. And we have that bias, and that's why we're very upfront about who we are and what we believe. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of leeway between having our own personal views and our roles as journalists, and I think we're well within that.
That's interesting because you're actually you actually make more of a distinction than I do, because I also call myself an advocacy journalist. I say that my journalism is in service of my activism and my advocacy, and I make no bones about it. I do a lot on the subjects that I cover. And when I'm live streaming protests, I'm not holding a sign because obviously I'm holding my camera, but I'm also, apt to not chant, but, maybe sometimes say right on, or, express my opinion, agreeing with what one of the protesters is saying. Or if I'm leading a protest, I'll give someone my camera so they can live stream the protest to my page. And personally, I feel like you can do both at the same time. Curious as to what Seth thinks about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. The current standard that's taught in journalism schools of objective, down the middle journalism, that's not something that's mandated by the Constitution, and that's not something that should define journalism. Not that I'm some kind of constitutional originalist, but if you go back to the time that the First Amendment was drafted, journalism back then was probably closer to what the Asheville Blade does than to what the Washington Post does. Journalists generally had an agenda. They were affiliated with a political movement and ideology, a political party, and their purpose of their publication was to achieve a result. The idea of objective, quote unquote, professional journalism as we know it came about later. And it should go without saying, the journalists who most need to be protected by the First Amendment are those who are most critical of the government or the police or whoever it may be. If you're saying things that the government wants you to say, you don't need to worry about them coming after you. You're their friend. So it's people like Matilda and Veronica who most need to be protected. And any argument that just because they're upfront about their political views or that they're adversarial towards the police department should diminish their protection under the First Amendment, in my view, does not fly.
Wow, here. I totally agree with that. Another point that's been made is that you're not, quote unquote, real journalists, whatever that means. I assume it means professionals paid by an established media outlet, but in fact, citizen journalists. So I want to ask each of you, do you consider yourself a citizen journalist first? And second, do you think that means your journalism is any less professional than someone being paid for it, or maybe even someone with a journalism degree? And finally, do you think that citizen journalists should be afforded the same First Amendment protection as any other journalist? I guess we can start with you, Matilda.
Okay. So I don't feel like that distinction is very helpful between citizen journalists and regular journalists, because I think journalism, regardless of how much a journalist is earning or if they're part of a established, like a more mainstream outlet, the Blade's been around for almost a decade. So that would be that would even not really align with some of those conceptions. And yeah, I identify as a journalist. And we do make money. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/AVL Blade. And so, yeah, we get paid. I hope that's all of the question.
Yeah, Veronica, how about yourself?
Yeah, it's such a complex idea because social media makes, for me, joining the Blade was about being a witness and about making sure that people understood, people knew what was actually happening in their area, because I saw a lot of stuff being said that I knew wasn't true because I had seen it. So I think potentially it's in a weird time frame because social media really changed everything. Like, for me, it's about witnessing something, about making sure people know what's happening, and anyone can do that theoretically. But like Matilda said, I work for the Blade. That I'm a journalist. I take pictures, and that's what I do. It's my job. Like, yeah, I'm so sorry.
Okay, no, I get it. And I would concur. I mean, I, wanted to be a journalist ever since high school, a broadcast journalist. And when I moved to Boston after I graduated, which I thought was a smaller market than where I grew up, New York, silly me. But, I found out about this thing called public access cable TV. And when I found out that citizens were learning how to use small format video equipment, this was way before cell phones, and that they could actually produce things without their voices being edited through the filter of a reporter or an editor or producer, I'm like, sign me up. I want to run one of those stations. And I was actually running a public access station in Lexington, Mass, when I was 24 years old. And I thought it was the greatest thing for free speech since the adoption of the First Amendment. So, I mean, live streaming is exactly that thing. You are not filtering. Viewers are seeing exactly what is going on. I mean, we used to say during Occupy, when they were raiding the camps, the whole world is watching, the whole world is watching. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but, I even said that when I was being arrested for live streaming the Poor People's Campaign disruption of the state Senate. The whole world is watching. And it's quite a great public service. And, when C-SPAN does it, when C-SPAN showed the entire Congress completely live, unedited, that was considered a great service. So I don't understand why people don't have the same respect for, what live streamers and citizen journalists do. But yeah, Seth, I'd like you to weigh in on that topic about citizen journalism. And then I'm going to go to Ben to talk about the trial.
Sure. Well, I don't see any distinction in terms of legal protections, in terms of First Amendment rights, or in terms of value of citizen journalism versus mainstream journalism. We've got new technologies that open up lanes for citizen journalism that didn't exist before. And the law, the courts, everyone should encourage them and provide them with the protection that that they need. In the case of Veronica and Matilda, I don't know that it's citizen journalism in spirit, but as Matilda pointed out, they are professional journalists. They're being paid to do journalism. They write for an actual publication that publishes regularly. And if you read the Asheville Blade, sure, they're not purporting to be down the middle. They're not writing in the style of the Associated Press, but they're linking to their source material regularly. You can read what they're writing, and you can click the link and see whether you think that it substantiates the reporting. And if you think they overstated it or got it wrong, fine, but they're at least empowering you to make that determination for yourself. So even if you could come up with these hypothetical gray areas, is everybody with a Facebook account who, pops up with their opinion a journalist? This is nowhere near any of those gray areas. These are people who are paid to write for a publication. They fit the definition of journalism by any standard you can think of, in my view.
Yeah. And even I, who am not paid to write for a publication, I've written for many alternative publications, haven't been paid for it, but I've got a plethora of articles. And I've also done over 300 interviews on my own show with newsmakers. So I don't know if I'm a citizen journalist, but I don't really care, because I do proudly call myself an advocacy journalist. And I also think it's a myth about objectivity. To go back to what you were saying before, Seth, I think they feel in the corporate media that if they present both sides of the story, that somehow the viewer is going to be able to determine which side is right. And I think that's really, not much of a service. They should really be digging in and providing much more information. I mean, it's when like climate change, when you have 99% of the climate scientists saying that climate change is real and it's caused by human activity, and you have 1% of the scientists that are paid by the Koch brothers or whatever, the oil companies, saying that it's not. You don't give equal weight to both of those sides, and furthermore, I think every person comes into journalism with their own biases based on, something simple as their socioeconomic status or, their belief system, or even the desire to maintain access to newsmakers. I always used to rib a friend of mine who reported for a broadcast station in Los Angeles. He always got the best guests, but he never asked him the tough questions. And he pretty much admitted that he wanted them to come back, and they wouldn't come back if he was known as that kind of journalist. So, that's kind of like access journalism. But now I want to go to you, Ben, and talk about, because you've been waiting so patiently, tell us, you're a musician and an attorney, and you ran for district attorney twice. Tell us why you decided to defend Matilda and Veronica. And I understand you're also doing it pro bono. Thank you.
Sure. Also, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this group. I'm honored to be sharing the screen with you, all of you. You're truth tellers, and that's what's most important. First, I want to touch a little bit on the last topic that y'all were talking about, this distinction that they're trying to draw between journalists and citizen journalists. I think all of it is encapsulated in the First Amendment. The First Amendment has a number of freedoms in it. Freedom of the press is just one of them. Freedom of religion, freedom from religion, freedom of speech. This is a bundle of rights that is meant to incorporate the activities that people that Veronica and Matilda were engaged in, so that you can't draw a line and say these are press and these are, this is freedom of the press, this is freedom of speech. Those lines don't exist. The framers were very insistent on the public being able to speak and being able to view the government that they were viewing. So anyway, that's on that point. What was the next question? I'm sorry, I got a little waylaid.
Yes, I asked you what drew you to this case and why you decided to defend these journalists.
Well, I've been doing. You call yourself an advocacy journalist. I call myself an advocacy lawyer. I have been representing protesters and activists and people who are seeking to express themselves and exercise their First Amendment rights for a number of years. And this fits that perfectly. Because, I mean, even if they were not journalists at the time, I think they were, if they were just activists, there's a good chance I would be involved in representing them in this case that they have against them. I think that lawyers have an outsized influence. We certainly are overpaid in many senses, and I think it's incumbent upon us that have this have a law degree and have a law practice to give back. And this, to me, is what I'm called to do.
Now, you ran for district attorney twice. Obviously, from what you've said, you would not have prosecuted these journalists. Why do you think Todd Williams, who identifies as a progressive district attorney, is doing this? In the pre-interview, you talked about the relationship between his office and the Asheville Police Department. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, I wouldn't try to guess what his thought processes are. But I just kind of trying to figure out what is going on here. That's the first thing that comes to mind, is that there's some pressure he's getting to prosecute this. Now, where would that pressure be coming from? It's not the public. And so it has to be coming from the police. And so why isn't he able to stand up to the police on this situation? I don't know. Maybe he agrees. Maybe he agrees that these people should be prosecuted. I can't gather that. I just I work in the courthouse every day, and I hear people talking about what's going on there, and I see cases stacking up, and I see time being wasted, money being wasted, and wasted in a way that harms, I think, the public's trust of the system. It harms APD. It harms the district attorney's office to have this attention focused on their discretionary decisions. You know, these are discretionary decisions. This isn't like somebody murdered somebody or stole something or whatever. I mean, the police have shown that they can handle these types of situations without an arrest easily. I was working with a group from Sunrise who, as part of a protest, decided to occupy the mayor's office at City Hall, and they were bound and determined to be arrested doing it. And APD, to their credit, told them, "Okay, we're going to arrest you," and they lined them up. And they said, "You're going to march you down these stairs, and then once you get down to this, at the bottom of the staircase, we're going to put the handcuffs on you." And they said, "Okay." And they marched down the steps. They got outside the door. APD closed and locked the door behind them and said, "See you later." You know, exact same thing could have happened here. If Matilda and Veronica were actually in the way, and the officers were concerned about their own safety, that they were scared of what Matilda and Veronica were going to do, they could have said, "Okay, stand over there then. You know, you can see from over there. Okay, stand over there. You're out of our way." But they didn't do that. They put them in the paddy wagon. Okay. And at that point, if they're still concerned about their safety, if that's the reason why they enforce the trespassing law the way they did, singling out these two people, they could have let them go after they'd done everything they were going to do in the park. They could have driven them to the police station and let them out, but they didn't. They processed them through as if these were crimes that needed to be prosecuted, that needed to be the force of the law put behind them, and I just don't think they did.
Yeah. Now, Seth, you cover a lot of these cases with your press freedom tracker, journalists being arrested. I was arrested. We were taken, mostly pastors, actually. About 43 of us were taken to the county jail. We sat there for 4 hours in handcuffs. To the CHP, California Highway Patrol office. We sat there in handcuffs. Then they took us to the county jail. We ended up, being booked and mugshotted and the whole business, put in the holding cell until midnight. So, we were in custody from 2 p.m. till midnight, but then they never even charged us. And, we figured it was just they wanted to make an example of us to show what protesting in the Capitol does so people wouldn't do it. But this is just beyond me. This is just beyond me that they're prosecuting. What's your experience and the percentage that actually get this far, just actual, prosecution for journalism.
It's unusual. I don't have an exact percentage for you, but last year, according to our U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, which documents arrests of journalists among numerous other categories of press freedom violations, there were 15 journalists arrested in the United States. The number was much higher in 2020 and 2021. That's not because the situation has gotten better or police have changed their attitudes. It's just because there were fewer large-scale protests in 2022 than in the couple of years before that. So I think in 2020, the number was upwards of 150. There have only been 4. This was the 4th trial of journalists arrested in the course of news gathering, according to our data, since 2018. So this is really a rarity. Usually after journalists are arrested, and I don't want to minimize arrests like what you went through, that's a serious press freedom violation on its own. But usually, if you look at it as an optimist, you'll say that authorities come to their senses, talk it over, realize that, as Ben was saying, it's not in the interest of justice or in the interest of the public to pursue the case. If you're a little bit more cynical, as I sort of am, you might conclude that they dropped the charges because they realize they're putting the cities, the government agencies they work for and government officials at risk of liability for violating the First Amendment. But one way or the other, they drop the cases. This was rare, not only that it's going to trial, but that, as Ben was alluding to, there's no allegation that the journalists engaged in disorderly conduct, obstructed police. The sole basis for the case is that they stayed at a park that closed at 10 p.m. to document ongoing police actions until 10:30 or so. And I don't know if we have another case where the sole charge was something so petty. It just seemed like they were being prosecuted on such a technicality. I think I said in one of my op-eds, maybe they also jaywalked on the way to the park. It just seemed so ridiculous to us. And it made us wonder if there was something more going on beneath the surface. I mean, I'm not from Asheville. I don't know all the local dynamics, but it made me wonder. And then as we start looking into it more, we find out about the sort of hostility between the police department and the Asheville Blade. And we ended up joining with the ACLU of North Carolina and Committee to Protect Journalists to petition for body camera footage. And we see the police saying, arrest the journalists first because they're videotaping and talking about whether they'd wise up after having been arrested. We hear interviews with the police chief where he's claiming the journalists cause some kind of problems when the footage is clear that they did not. And between the pettiness of the charges and the history there and the comments we're hearing, it really starts to look more and more like a case of retaliation. I don't know whether the arresting officers themselves knew that the journalists were from the Asheville Blade or knew about the Blade's past coverage, but I'm sure their higher-ups did. And I suspect that that's a big reason why this case is still going on, while so many others get dropped. Another reason why I think this case has endured longer than some of the others is because the national media hasn't really written about it a whole lot. There were a couple high-profile arrests this year. Dion Robin, I'm not sure if I pronounced his name correctly, from the Wall Street Journal, and Evan Lambert from News Nation, both known journalists with national organizations. They were arrested also for trespassing. In Dion's case, he was detained in a police van and let go. The mayor of Phoenix, where that happened, personally apologized to him. In Evan's case, charges were dropped after a few days. Is that because the police officers and other government officials had a change of heart and realized the wrong of their ways? Maybe. I think it's more likely because it made national headlines and embarrassed them, and they were pressured into dropping the charges. And it's unfortunate that that hasn't happened here just because the journalists in question don't work for the Wall Street Journal. They work for the Asheville Blade. The story shouldn't be the media outlet. The story should be the principle and the precedent it sets.
Yeah, I wonder if we can get somebody from the Columbia Journalism Review to write about this, or maybe my friend Bryce Green, who writes for fairness and accuracy in reporting, or maybe Marjorie Cohn, who just had something come out today. She's with the National Lawyers Guild. She writes in Truth Out. Maybe one of those outlets would cover it, but
They should. Some of the other press freedom organizations have issued statements recently. Reporters Without Borders, the National Press Club, I mentioned the Committee to Protect Journalists, PEN America put out a statement. So it's getting attention from the nonprofit world, from the advocacy world, but I really wish it was getting some attention from the national media.
yeah. Now, I remember in Los Angeles when I was interviewing some district attorney candidates, I was asking them about why they thought that Jackie Lacey, who there were more police murders in LA than any other jurisdiction, and she never prosecuted any of them, including one where the police chief himself, the police commissioner, all thought that this guy should be prosecuted. She didn't do it. And the supposition was because she needed the police to make her cases, and also contributions from the Police Protective League. Ben, do any of those two factors come into play here, do you think, with Todd Williams?
I mean, you can't discount them. I think there needs to be a strong relationship between the police and the district attorney's office. And so certainly that is one of the reasons why this case is still going forward, is there's a desire. It may not be from Todd himself. It may be from the assistant district attorneys who are pushing forward with it. It's really hard to tell. I mean, Todd is he doesn't speak in the public. He doesn't try his own cases. He doesn't present himself in any way that would indicate how he's feeling about things like this. So, I mean, journalists have been asking me these questions, and I haven't seen an answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know what's driving the ship at this point.
Now let's go to the trial itself that just happened, where you were found guilty. I want to ask Veronica and Matilda, did either of you see that coming? I mean, what did you think going into that trial, how you would be found?
Ben did a really good job preparing us for kind of the worst case scenario. So I'm very grateful that I didn't feel as shocked as I might have been. I know a lot of things that they said on the stand really just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like the cop that said he didn't care whether or not we were with the press, and yeah, it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, with a bench trial, it comes down to one person. And what was really interesting to me, that's what stuck with me, was the fact that the prosecution wasn't even debating that we were journalists. But when it came time for the judge to deliver his verdict, he said that there had not been evidence produced that we were journalists. I mean, just like looking at that, like, had the prosecution been pushing that we weren't journalists, I'm sure we would have countered that, but that wasn't something that was coming up. And also, like, why, like, is water wet? We've been telling people, you know, like, I mean, Veronica was arrested in 2020 as a reporter. Those charges were dropped. Like literally, like that's what's in the, I mean, you know, maybe that's not specifically in the court files, but like it's clear that we're journalists, and the fact that the judge thought differently just more shows his perspective, like personal perspective and personal views, more than it shows any kind of like application of legal principle.
Well, in researching him, I did read that he said that he was against defunding the police. He did come out with that. He said he didn't like to share his political views, but he did come out with that opinion. And I think I also read in relation to this case that he either said in the court or maybe in an interview afterwards with the Citizen Times that it wasn't a factor whether you were journalists or not, because it was purely a trespassing case. But, as I mentioned to Ben when we spoke on the phone last night, it seems to me that if you're going to go by strict trespassing, it's like, Seth said in his op-ed, did they arrest anyone else that night for trespassing? The police technically were trespassing because they were in the park after closing, yet their excuse would be they were doing their jobs. So certainly, Matilda and Veronica were doing their jobs too. An exception can be made. So I'm wondering what's going to be, without giving away your court strategy, obviously, to the other side, what can you share with us is going to be your approach to the appeal on this? And by the way, thank you for appealing this.
Well, I mean, that's up to Matilda and Veronica. They made that call.
Yes.
The reason why the judge said that is he said he hadn't heard any evidence that they were journalists, and that's not altogether true, because there was plenty of cross-examination of the officers in which we discussed what Matilda and Veronica both claimed to be at the time of the arrest. It was in the body cam footage. There was plenty of evidence that they were journalists. What there wasn't any in that trial was any evidence from us. I chose not to put on any evidence at that stage. We don't have to put on any evidence in this country. Defendants are presumed innocent, and it's up to the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt their guilt. I made a strategic, tactical decision to not put on any evidence at that point because I anticipated what was going to happen with the verdict anyway, and I anticipated that we were going to have an appeal. So what's going to be different in this appeal is we are going to put on a lot of evidence. We are going to engage in, we're going to be sending out subpoenas as early as tomorrow morning to a number of agencies, individuals, lawyers. A lot. If you're in any way involved in this case and you work for the city of Asheville, you will be getting a subpoena. So we're going to show at the trial exactly what happened from both sides, which did not happen in the bench trial.
Okay, I want to pivot to another subject that's kind of related, having to do not so much with this case, but with the protesters' case, and that relates to a new organization. I don't really know what kind of organization it is. They don't have a website where they say their mission and their members. It's kind of like a private Facebook group, but it's called the Asheville Coalition for Public Safety. And their purpose is ostensibly to support the police, who they think are very necessary in this crime-ridden city that we live in. And they recently had a sort of underhanded campaign to try to get advertisers of a radio program, an anarchist radio program, on a local, low-power, non-commercial radio station, who interviewed two of the protesters to cancel their advertising with the station over this protest. And this really, over them interviewing these protesters, because they thought the gist of it was anti-police and that they thought the anarchists are out to destroy the world. It was just ridiculous. Anyway, I felt pretty strongly about this because I found out that the two chairmen of this group, they were registered Democrats. And this really put me in mind of what these conservatives are doing in red states, trying to ban books in public school libraries. Here they are trying to censor a radio station for, putting out a certain point of view. And I listened to the program. It provided a great public service. I learned a lot about this issue and about our community. And I have to say that, I cut my teeth in 1978. I'm sort of aging myself here, but I was an intern at WBZ in Boston. It was after my junior year in college. And it was the same summer that the American Nazi Party wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois. And, Skokie, Illinois was a place where a lot of Holocaust survivors lived, and they didn't want them to march. And the ACLU famously defended them, saying that the antidote to bad speech is not censorship, but more speech. And that's kind of what I've believed ever since then, including, when I ran my, public access station, I was always asked, well, what if the Nazi Party wanted to put a program on here in Lexington Community Television? And I said, well, first of all, they'd have to be a local resident, or they'd have to have a local sponsor. And if they did, I would immediately contact the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith and ask them to put a counter program, and I would put that on directly afterwards. Now, this Coalition for Public Safety, they didn't call the producers of this show and ask if they could come on. They didn't go to the station and apply to have their own show. No, they just did this behind the scenes, underhanded campaign to try to get, the advertisers to pull their money, which fortunately they didn't do. And it actually ended up, they raised more in their fundraising drive than, ever before, which was great for them. So this kind of concerns me because, on a national level, we have the Twitter files, which Matt Taibbi and others have been reporting, that showed collaboration between national security agencies and Twitter, getting Twitter to remove posts, tweets. And all the liberal, media are saying this is a nothing burger. So I'm kind of concerned that this support of censorship in our society has become a bipartisan affair. And I wanted to know if anybody else wanted to weigh in on that, or if we're just going to leave that as my commentary on the subject.
Well, I've noticed, and bringing it back to this case, to Matilda and Veronica's case, I've seen some people on social media who seem absolutely shocked that the judge who convicted them was a Democrat. Similarly, people might assume that Barack Obama would have been friendly to the press and to whistleblowers when, in fact, he prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act than anyone before. As you mentioned.
Than all presidents combined in the 100 years since it was enacted.
Correct. And as you mentioned, Joe Biden's going after Julian Assange as we speak. So I think no matter what their background or their political affiliation, government officials they're not going to like journalists and whistleblowers who embarrass them, and they're going to use the weapons at their disposal to stop that. So rather than focusing on who is in office and thinking that one person is going to be less friendly to the press or more friendly to the press than the other, let's focus on not giving them the weapons to silence dissent, because both parties are going to use that weapons as long as they have them. The Espionage Act is an excellent example. That's a federal statute that criminalizes, it's called the Espionage Act, but it has nothing to do with espionage. It criminalizes just having national defense information. Taken literally, someone could be prosecuted for reading national defense information in the newspaper. It's sort of absurd that the federal government has that power, and they're using it to prosecute Julian Assange for the same things that journalists do every day, obtaining and publishing information. If you give, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be trespassing laws, but if you give public officials trespassing laws to work with, they're going to use them to do things like this, to abuse those trespassing laws to prevent journalists from doing their jobs and intimidate them and retaliate against them. So there need to be clear legal precedents that even if a law is generally applicable, it cannot be abused and used as a pretext to retaliate against journalists or against others exercising their First Amendment rights. And the Supreme Court has said that numerous times, and other courts have said it as well. But it's not necessarily something that every local judge fully understands, and they should.
Okay, well, we've sort of reached the end of our hour, but I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to maybe make some comments that I didn't ask about, something that you want the public to know about this case, and maybe how they can support you going forward.
Yeah, I think a really important tangible way to support the Blade is to either make a one-time donation to us or to join and become a subscriber on patreon.com/AVLblade. We're trying to report on other news too, in addition to having to report on what we're going through because we were made into the news on Christmas night, in 2021. Yeah, I think I don't have much to really add beyond that. I think, as Ben mentioned earlier, we're going to present evidence, and stay tuned.
Anything you want to say, Veronica?
No, I don't really have anything to add. Just the Matilda got to the Patreon, and I want to thank. I don't get to see Ben much outside of the courtroom, so I want to extend mine and Matilda and everybody at the Blades gratitude for all the work that you've done for us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you guys for sticking your neck out, and I will always defend your rights to do that.
All right, I guess, Seth, you get the last word here.
Well, of course, we're hoping for a positive result at the appeal. If it gets to that, we'd be even more delighted if the district attorney would finally drop these charges and not force Matilda and Veronica to go through with this appeal. There's still the opportunity to do that, and it's a nonsensical use of prosecutorial discretion to go through with this case, and it also, based on the evidence to date, and I suspect the evidence that will come from the discovery process, really does seem like a case of retaliation against journalists for exercising their First Amendment rights. So I hope it doesn't come to an appeal, but if it does, of course, we are very much rooting for Matilda and Veronica, and of course, everyone should support them in any way they can through the means that Matilda just mentioned. And if any journalists are listening, please do write about this case. The more attention it gets, the better.
Well,
And if I could add just a little bit, the fact that they chose to do this on Christmas Day after hours is in and of itself an indication that they were trying to hide what they were doing, which is all the more important why Matilda and Veronica should have been there. Because whenever government tries to act in a secretive way, that heightens the need for the press to be involved. And I don't think you can separate this, what the police did that night. In addition to trying to silence the media, they were trying to punish the people who were providing sanctuary space to the houseless community. And they're continuing that prosecution in a very ham-handed way, and they're spending a lot of money going after those people for felony littering. Not only did, and I'm going to shift gears just slightly, not only did they arrest Matilda and Veronica, but they banned them from public parks without telling them that they'd done so, without a hearing, without notice or opportunity to be heard at all. So the deprivation of their rights was manifold. They've been messing with these people quite on a bunch of different fronts, and we're going to get to the bottom of that, and we're going to expose that unless and until they come to their senses and dismiss it, and then we're free to move into federal court where we'll sue them for taking these actions.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that I've been trying to cover that other trial for months, talking to different attorneys and different defendants, and I haven't been able to get anybody to come on my show. But maybe now they see how I've handled this situation, maybe they'll come on and I can do a show about that as well, because it really, as Cindy Heil, who's a viewer, just pointed out, it's really outrageous that they're, prosecuting this even when public opinion is against it. And especially when they have 40 murder defendants that are sitting in jail, that need their trial, that need their day in court. And
I
the,
just say that the public, whether public opinion is formed or not, is not relevant. I'll just throw that out there. The district attorney has to do things that are unpopular.
okay,
So popular
yeah,
opinion
good
shouldn't
point.
be part of it. But he is a politician, so
Yeah, good point.
there's a political cost that he's going to have to pay for this.
Yeah, and the ACLU has taken on this case of the park bans because why they would ban somebody before they're even found guilty doesn't even seem like that's legal, you know? So that's crazy. Anyway, I want to thank you all for being on the show. I wish you great luck in your appeal. And I want everybody to share this show. And I'm going to end the way I always end by telling everybody to keep fighting. Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.